We had a little technical issue with the audio in this session, so don't worry. Your speaker or AirPods are not broken. Enjoy. Today, I'm delighted to be joined by Jen Johnson of Mars Foods. Hi, Jen. How are you?
Hello, how are you? Morning, everybody.
So I've known Jen since she was back in Frucor days. As I've had a category, probably is the first time I met you, Jen. I reckon, possibly.
Oh, I think you met me in an enamel.
Probably before that, in enamel. Going further back, and I will explore your journey today from the early days as a grad back at Cadbury through to the move to Australia, and then through your career at Frucor and Diageo to Mars. So lots to talk about. Now, for those of you perhaps on the call for the first time, you are muted, but that doesn't mean to say we don't want to hear from you. We're quite happy to take questions as a chat facility, so jump in, and if there's something that you want to ask as you go, then just ask it, and if we think it's the right time, then we'll ask that question, or we've got time at the end to go into questions too. And as always, some of you pre-submitted questions, which we will get to some of those as well. So now let's I'll just open up the chat facility and we'll get into it. So here we go. Now we'll start a little bit as we always do, Gemma, to just, I guess, to know you more personally. So when you're not being the sales director of Mars, what's life like? What do you do?
I'm being mum normally when I'm not being sales director of Mars. So I a single mum half the time. So I have half of my life where I'm juggling two crazy little monkeys and running around to rugby practice and school events and all of those kinds of things. And then I get half my time where I'm solo, and that's when I get to do a little bit more of the stuff for me. So do a little bit of running, not quite as much as I used to. So I used to do a little bit of half marathons and a bit of bush trail running and things like that. I've got a little bit lazy in my old age, so a bit more of a walker these days. So I try and get up and outside in the mornings. What else do I do? I've just taken up golf lessons. So I'm going back to the sales directors of 20 years ago, and I'm taking up golf. So my my lovely dad bought me some golf lessons for my birthday. He clearly thinks I still need that for my career. And if that wasn't all enough, I am doing something for my creative side too. So I'm actually doing a certificate in interior design at the moment. Really different. So
amazing.
Keeps my innovation live and creative mind.
Lots going on there. I'm with you on the bush and trail running. That's definitely my thing, and a bit of golf as well. But interior design, that's excellent.
That's the that's the next thing. Next Shane ablaze, hopefully. So we'll see.
Yeah, good. Now you live on the Central Coast, beautiful part of the world, and it's interesting because I think one of the plus sides of COVID is how much more accessible we are to perhaps places we might not consider working, because they're maybe things too far away, whether it's the South Coast, Central Coast. Are you starting to see more Sydney-siders landing in your
clogging up my local beach? Yes, I am. No, look, I think it's been happening for the last 5 years or so. You definitely notice that there are more people around from Sydney, parents at the school, neighbours moving up. So it was already happening. But I think what's happening now is we've suddenly realised that we can be so much more flexible than we were. People can work from home, or if you can't work from home, you can work the commute into your working hours, and you can do that. You can be sort of working on the go, and I just think it's going to change. It won't just be the Central Coast; it'll be everywhere, right? But I think you can get a better balance now. You can live by the beach and not pay the exorbitant prices of the northern beaches. But you can have that lifestyle and still have a great career. And I'm hoping it happens, because I bought a house about 3 months ago. So if you could all move up and push the value of my property up, that'd be great. Just stay off the beach.
Yeah, exactly. Good investment. It is interesting because one of the first questions as a recruiter you normally ask somebody is, where do you live? What's commutable for you? But that's just becoming a really different conversation now. So when we're engaging with businesses perhaps in the periphery of Sydney, which we would alienating for some, they're now pretty much in range for most. Which is good. So getting into your career journey, your degree was in international business with French from Warwick Uni, where my nephew is right now doing applied mathematics. But not my scene. I'm always curious, because have you found your degree useful during your career?
Yes, but probably not in the way that you would think.
Yeah.
So sadly, the French, not so much. There was a little bit of opportunity to speak very early days at Frucor when they were owned by doesnt. So there are a few Frenchies in the building then, so I have a little bit of opportunity to practice and talk to those guys.
Yeah.
But from an actual work sense, not so much. And obviously over here, not really much need for French speakers.
Yeah.
The basics of the business side of the degree, obviously, yes. So, learned the sort of foundations, and that was helpful when I was getting started. But I actually think the single biggest benefit of that degree was that I got to do a year living overseas in Paris and working.
Right.
So outside of the fun that was had during that year, which is obviously amazing,
Yeah.
working in a different country where you don't speak the language fluently, it's a different culture, you're on your own, you know nobody, that is a lesson in resilience. And that for me was where I learned that, you can do anything.
Yeah.
It's hard and sometimes it feels really uncomfortable, but you can do it and you will get through it. And yeah, that year for me was such an unlocker in terms of sort of confidence and, realizing that, the world's yours really. So
yeah, particularly when you're young.
Oh, completely. Yeah. I do remember the first day though, sitting there in the canteen at the office with this group of French-speaking people that was my new team, and just sitting there listening to them babbling on, and they're Parisian as well, so they speak very fast.
Yeah.
And I couldn't understand a word anybody was saying, and I thought, oh my goodness, what have I done? I'm getting on the first Eurostar back to England, but fast forward a couple of weeks and you start understanding, and it's great.
Excellent. Now, you joined Cadbury as your first organisation you worked for in a kind of market research analyst type role?
Yeah, it was the first rotation I did.
First rotation, so as a grad?
It was so it was a sales and marketing grad scheme,
right.
And I went into the research role.
Right. And you then moved to Sydney, worked for Nielsen, I think was your first role there before joining Frucor. Now, so quite kind of consumer FMCG oriented. Was that the plan?
No, absolutely not. So there was no plan in that space. When I was looking at jobs out of uni and graduate schemes, I knew that obviously it was in that business space. So, sales and marketing were the programs that I was looking at. But I had no idea at that time, what industry. I didn't know whether I wanted to go down the sales path, the marketing path. So I really picked a few businesses that I went through the recruitment process for, and it was more based on what scale of opportunities did I think there would be afterwards, how much growth could you get in those businesses, and what was the culture like.
Yeah.
So interestingly, I ended up getting 2 offers that I was considering from 2 different businesses. Cadbury's was one, obviously, that I went with. And the reason I went with them was really based on culture. So the other business that I won't actually name, when we were going through the recruitment process, they made it very, very clear that, they really expected you to sort of sell your soul to them, and they paid royally. I think the graduate salary was twice what the Cadbury one was at the time. They offered you an Audi expensed A4 car, which 23-year-old, you're going, oh my god, you're giving me the world here, this stuff's amazing. But the way they spoke about what you would do and how you would be expected to sort of dedicate your life to the business, I thought, what, I'm really excited about my career, but I'm also excited about my life and family one day, and this isn't really where I'm going to be. So that's been a huge part in terms of how I've picked businesses over the years. Culture and balance is enormous for me.
I think it's the first lens anybody should look at. Often the first lens is the role. And the as we talk about in this program, it can be the title, or particularly within the sales world, it's we live in a hierarchical world too much. But actually, the company's the first thing you should look at.
It totally is, because the role, you can change. If you're in the right business, the role becomes wrong. Generally, if the cultural fit is right and you're right for them as well, you'll find other opportunities, and you'll take the learnings from the role that wasn't right for you and you move on. But if you're in the wrong business and it's not fitting, it's never going to last.
Agreed. We'll come back to that, I think. So for years, I've been encouraging this talent flow between category and customer sales, and it's certainly in the last 2 3 years it's happening a lot more, to which I'm delighted with. Now your career has been pretty much 50-50 throughout. What do you see as the benefits of both?
I'm so pro category, and you knew I would be. That was sort of where I started my career, and when I took my big step up in terms of leadership, that was in the category function. Look, I think when you're having a successful sales career, excuse me, and a successful customer conversation, the absolute key is that you need to be talking to them about mutual strategies for growing their business, growing your business. And really, that's what category is. That's where that strategy comes from, is how do you grow the size of the pie that you're then all benefiting from. And I think if you've worked firsthand in that, it's a native language for you when you're talking to your customers. And I think the conversations that you have are more productive. I think you understand their world more. And I really think, you're just setting yourself up for a better conversation. But I also think in terms of your career, if you've got general management aspirations, I think it's hugely beneficial for that as well, because the exposure that you have to other departments, different stakeholders, is significant. So the crossover I had with marketing, shopper, pricing through the category role was huge. And that is some of the stuff that I think has set me in good stead for being where I am today in the current role.
It's almost a must-do function, completely. I think, for MD on a pathway where sales perhaps is the core. And I think sometimes one category role is good, but I wouldn't just jump in for a year and feel you tick the box. I think you've got to spend a bit more time actually getting through a couple of cycles.
Yes.
In order for it to really land from a benefit point of view. Because when I'm recruiting a senior sales role, say a sales director, or even when I'm recruiting a head of category now, then almost I would say guarantee in that brief is, if it's a head of category role, you must have managed a customer. Or if it's a head of sales or national sales manager or sales director role, you must have spent time in category. So it's almost like a prerequisite now.
Completely, and that's exactly the thing. It goes both ways. So yes, for a career in sales or to become a sales director, category is incredibly important. But equally the other way around, I think some of the most effective category talent that I've seen over the years is people that have worked customer facing as well, because you get it from both sides of the coin, right? So big advocate.
Well, we have a lot of category people on the call, on the program, which is great, who are also investing time in understanding the sales director perspective for that very reason. So I think the message is starting to land, which is good. Now I meet a lot of people who invest a significant amount of time in one company, and in my experience, when you kind of reach that 10-year mark, you run the risk of being institutionalized. Almost kind of too comfortable with the people, the systems, the process, the culture. You know how to get things done, therefore there's almost a challenge from that point onwards in terms of your marketability externally. Now you kind of reached that point in Frucor. You were 10 years-ish in, and then you moved new business, new sector to Diageo, new role as well. How did you find that?
Really tough. It was a really big decision for me, and you start to question your capability, I think. So 10 years in one business, you've worked your way up, and you know everything. You know the history of the business. You know what worked and what didn't work when you've tried things over the years. You know the systems, you know the people and the politics, and you know how to get things done, as you said. So you know the person to sort of shortcut the system and get where you need to get. So I think, I'd had 10 years of some really good progressive moves within Frucor, and obviously had some great feedback during that time, which was why I was progressing. But you get to the point where you're thinking, Frucor, in my eyes, at that point in time, was a small business. I actually have a different view now, but, a small business, and I'm looking at Diageo, this global giant of a business in a sector that I hadn't worked in. And I thought, I don't actually know if I'm going to be able to do this. Am I good enough for this? And the first couple of months that I moved across, it was really daunting. new culture as well, and adjusting to that. You sort of almost feel like you've left your family and you're in this new space and you're forming all these relationships. But I honestly think best thing I ever did, because what it taught me was that actually my leadership is what is carrying my career. You don't need to know all the detail. You don't need to know the systems. What you have to know is how to build a team of people. You have to know how to trust your gut, trust your team, set the vision, and those things. Those are skills that I'd built up that were transferable. But yeah, it's a very tough decision to make when you've been there that long. But I would strongly advocate for take the jump, be bold. Trust yourself, and you'd be amazed what you can do. And I know that a year into that business, I've sort of really felt confident in my abilities, and that's probably why I am where I am now.
Yeah. It is a really interesting topic of conversation I often have, and it's not that you can work in 15, 20 years in a business and still make that move, but I think it becomes harder, and I think the comfort factor is not to be underestimated, and it's not to say that you are comfortable and lazy in your role, just you're comfortable with everything around you, and that contrast can be quite shocking, and that's on the business as much as it is on you when you then move, and sometimes I've heard from HR directors to say, I'm not sure I want to be the first person to take what's obviously a strong individual, because there's going to be an adjustment period, and I'd rather have them in the second move possibly.
I actually think that is a really good point, because I quite strongly believe that no matter where I'd gone after Frucor, it wouldn't have been the place I stayed. So it's nothing about Diageo. I love Diageo. Anybody on call from Diageo, I loved working there. But I obviously didn't stay a huge amount of time. But I think it was always going to be that sort of, that's the bit that breaks it for you. And then, it's the steps after that where you sort of probably stay a little longer.
Yeah.
So.
But I think it's interesting what you said there around almost realizing that what you bring is leadership, and yes, you had that comfort blanket of knowledge within the Frucor business, but actually you were being employed to be a leader in Diageo, and kind of really accelerated into those into that kind of mindset and skill set.
Completely, and I think I wasted a bit of time the first few months at Diageo as well, because I spent that time trying to learn everything.
Yeah.
And it was quite interesting when I was on my way out. I had a exit chat with my boss at the time, Andrew Clark, and he said the one piece of advice he would give me as I transitioned into Mars was just hit the ground running, because you do know this stuff, and there were things that you did at Diageo that you could have done earlier in, and they were transformative things that you did for the business, but you waited a while, and you don't need to. So that was the advice I was given, and I'd like to think that I took that, embraced it, and here we are.
Well, good segue into the next question, Jen. You moved to Mars to lead the food service channel. I'm a huge fan of getting contrasting experiences. We had Eugene Visioni from Bertram Wait on a few meetings ago, and that's a very food service orientated business.
Great food service business.
Yeah, a very different way of working. But you got promoted within 6 months as sales director, so you must have hit the ground running there. As you see, you must have took Andrew's words to heart.
Yeah, took it to heart, and you'd think I'd sort of tripled the size of the business or something, which I did not. I absolutely took the advice on board, and on my way into Mars, the brief that I was given as I was being recruited into that food service role was really about driving a change in that part of the business, and revisiting the strategy, and almost treating it as a separate business unit within the Mars food business. So it was about treating it as my own little mini GM role, and really demonstrating that I could do that quite quickly. And I would say what I was able to do was demonstrate that I could lead change. So for me, I'm sure we'll talk about what's important in leadership, but for me, leading change, particularly at the moment and in the environment we work in, is probably one of the most critical things that you need to be able to do to be successful. And I'd say in that first 4 months, we were able to drive a change in our strategy for the channel, the culture and ways of working of the team. We made a few changes in terms of structure of the team as well, and that was quick and it had an effect. And so I think that was a huge sort of box ticked in that space to demonstrate that I could do that. But the other side was it's not quite as sort of serendipitous as it sounds. I had been explicitly clear on the way into Mars that I was really ready for that role. So when I was talking about the food service role, I wanted to get into the Mars business. I'd been talking to them actually on and off for about 6 years. They're one of the only businesses based up at the Central Coast, and I'd been commuting for 8 years or so. So I'd always been talking to them, and the stars just hadn't quite aligned. A role would come up, somebody internal would get it, a role would come up that wasn't quite right for me. So when this one came up in food service, it was a sideways move for me. When I was at the point of my career, I was thinking I'm ready to go up. But I knew that the business was right, and I had a very clear conversation to find out what the current sales director's ambitions were, because I knew he'd been enrolled for about 3 years, so Matt Shortall at the time. And I knew he'd be moving within the next 12 months, roughly. No guarantees on anything, but I knew he was likely to move. And what I did guarantee was that I'd be allowed to put my hat in the ring.
Yeah.
So you never guaranteed a role like that. It doesn't work like that. But I was promised that I would be able to put my hat in the ring, even if he happened to move quicker than we were expecting, which is what happened. So I think actually 3 months into my role, he tapped me on the shoulder and said, "Jen, I'm moving on to the next thing. Are you ready? Do you want to put your hat in the ring?" And I went, "Yep," and jumped. So yeah.
I think that's a really important lesson to everybody on the program around managing expectations in a recruitment process. I think we touched on this in a couple of the previous sessions, where rarely does the conversation extend beyond the role you're being interviewed for. But actually, when you elevate the conversation to career thoughts, being able to have that narrative ready to go about what your ambitions are, actually it's a really good conversation to have, because you are setting expectation, and you're also getting a sense of how realistic are my pathways here. So I'm assessing not just the role, but the company and my pathway, which you were clearly doing, and it worked off. It worked really well.
It did. One of the only sort of planned, really deliberate moves that I've made. So
great. Now, one of the questions we ask all the sales directors, Jen, is about the move from working at an operational level to becoming more strategic. Was this something you were consciously aware of in your career?
Yes and no, and maybe not in the sense that you might think. I mean, for me, operational roles, strategy roles, I don't quite see it as sort of black and white as that. I think strategy for me is more a mindset, an approach, and a way of thinking and how you work. So I think, particularly given my career started in category where you're naturally sort of doing more of that strategic thinking anyway, I felt less of a shift in terms of what I was doing. So, yes, bigger roles and you're sort of doing more strategic thinking, but that wasn't so much the adjustment for me. The adjustment was recognizing that all of a sudden you go from this world where you do the strategic thinking and then you're you implement yourself and you turn that into action. Where all of a sudden in these bigger roles, you think and create the strategy, ideally with others. So you do that. And then other people actually have to go and bring that to life. And that's the bit that I found incredibly difficult. So I distinctly remember being in it was the head of category role at Frucor, and we were doing a huge piece of work on creating value in our portfolios as pack price architecture type work. And as part of that, one of the things that we needed to do was introduce some new equipment into our factory over in New Zealand. Obviously, lots of costs associated with that, and very, very conflicting KPIs, right? You're asking a factory to spend money and become less efficient.
Yeah.
But I've got this strategy on the page, and I'm like, but this is what it's going to deliver at the end. You guys just need to get on the bus. Like, come on, let's go. And I just kept hitting these roadblocks. 6 months in, and we're still not getting any progress on this, new piece of machinery. And I ended up going over to New Zealand, and I sat down and I spent some time with the operations team there, and I just tell me, why? What's wrong with my strategy? Why don't you want to do this? And it's amazing. Biggest learning, listening to people and understanding that, they're looking at this page and going, well, I don't know what's in this for me. This just isn't in line with anything I'm thinking. So a really valuable lesson in, when you take that jump, actually a lot of your job is then, the stakeholders that you have to get on the bus with you and creating that vision that isn't just a buy-in for you, but for everybody else. So that was the moment where I went, okay, we've changed it. We're in a different league here now. This is not what I'm used to.
Yeah.
So,
So because the role is different, and also how you get things done is completely different, because it's not just you.
No,
it's a lot of other people.
It's a whole lot of other people, and sometimes that's really challenging. But you learn along the way that if actually you've sort of given that guiding north star and people are bought into that, then actually the subsequent conversations about what needs to happen are a little easier. So investing the time up front is probably a lesson learned in terms of those strategic roles and how you action that.
Excellent. Now, you're one of 5 female sales directors, Jen. We've got on the first 2 seasons of the Sales Director Incubator, so 5 from 12, and which is about representative of the number of people females we have on the program. There's 350 or so registered, so about 40% are female. Do you think that's representative of FMCG sales today?
No, probably not.
Okay.
I think we're heading in that direction, and I definitely think we're making progress. I would say you only need to turn up at an industry event or a supplier forum and have a bit of a look around the room to know that we're not quite at 50-50 yet.
Yeah.
And it's not just gender diversity, right? You look around that room and you'll also see, in terms of age, ethnicity, background, all of those things, there's not the level of diversity that I think there needs to be in that space either. So I think we've still got a way to go as an industry, but I definitely think we've made huge progress over the last sort of 10, 15 years, and there are some great businesses out there that are really overtly focused on leading the charge in this space. So momentum, strong momentum, but are we there yet? No.
Yeah. I believe I've seen the role change a lot. The sales will change a lot over the years, and we've touched on it in some of the previous sessions. But when you've got diverse requirements in the role in terms of being able to be effective, you need diverse talent in order to be effective as well as a business. But from I guess an FMCG perspective, what more can we do to understand that concept that diversity isn't just box ticking; it's about performance. And how does that then flow through to talent attraction and talent retention?
Things like this obviously are hugely helpful, right? So you're putting people out there, in front of a whole group of people that have aspirations in this space, and you're demonstrating that you can get diversity, and that the people in these roles can be different, and that hopefully, I would like to think that everybody that's sort of sat through the series of podcasts here has seen different benefits from a very diverse group of people, right? So I think keeping the conversation live is probably the key theme here in terms of what we can do as an industry. I think, the bigger businesses and senior leaders have a responsibility to talk about this and to really push for it. It's an interesting one, right? Because it's almost like it's the buzzword at the moment, diversity and that side of things. But it's common sense, right? If you get a group of people in a room that are sort of mini clones of each other, you're going to come up with one idea. If you get a group of people in a room that, come from different backgrounds, that had different experiences, different careers, you're going to get a much better sum of ideas and probably a better outcome. So to me, it is common sense. I think the reality is it's really difficult. And I actually think not so much the diversity from a sort of recruitment perspective. You can put quite stringent processes and targets and quotas and things in place, whether that be for your recruitment pool or your actual hires. That's actually arguably the more manageable, easy bit to do. You can have the most diverse group of people in a team, though, and if you can't include them, if you don't have that inclusion culture, that for me is actually the heart of it. And that is really difficult. because it's human nature that we gravitate to people that we naturally think alike and have similar experiences. And that plays out in the workplace as well. So, we all know when you've got somebody on your team that you naturally click with more generally, or bounce an idea off them. You do that because subconsciously or consciously, they're going to endorse your idea and say it's a great idea.
Yeah.
But then you've missed the opportunity to speak to, 3 other people that could have given you a really good build that you just never would think of, and nor would the person that you went to talk to. So I think that's the hard part, and that's certainly something that I'm really sort of focused on and conscious of is how do you really drive an inclusive culture.
That's a really good point, because I think inclusiveness, as you put it there, actually is about facing into some confrontations and different perspectives and agitating your thinking. And to your point, where for a lot of people that's quite uncomfortable. And actually, but if you don't do that, then you're just going to get the same thought process.
Yeah, well, and it means that you have to open your mind to thinking that you might not have all the best answers, and that you might be wrong. Yeah. So that requires a level of vulnerability and resilience. But you have to be able to recognise that that group of people is probably going to come up with a better idea than you if you allow them to.
Yes, yeah, exactly. Let's move on to your kind of leadership style. What do people who work for you expect in terms of leadership? Do you have models and principles you work with?
No, it's the short answer to that. That's probably one of my biggest weaknesses, actually, is the lack of models and things that I lean on. Lots of exposure to them over the years. But I think I'm probably somebody that gravitates towards kind of picking bits from all the different models, and I've got my own mishmash of a leadership model. I think what people can expect from me, and hopefully getting today, is quite a lot of authenticity. Definitely very vulnerable, and that's sort of skills that I traits that I look for in a team as well. That ability to be who you are, and put your hand up when you don't know, put your hand up when you're wrong, ask for help. I think that's incredibly important. Ask for support. People want to give that to you, so ask for it. So I'd say that that's sort of a little bit about who I am as a leader, and I'd like to think pretty empowering to a team. I do believe that your role as a leader is to unlock the potential in the people around you and the best in the people around you, and that's obviously what I spend a lot of my time trying to do is unlock other people's potential. So less of the models, but few of the traits there.
It's what works. I think, which is being authentic. So what's next in the career?
Yeah, that's a good question. More learning. So I don't have, I'm quite envious. I've watched a few of the other podcasts, and there's a lot of people that have this really clear career path that they're chasing. And I was always the same when I was at school. The people that knew they wanted to be a doctor or knew they wanted to be a vet or whatever it was, I was always a bit more like, I'm not really quite sure yet. Well, I'll see on the way. So I'm a little envious. But for me, it's really just about making sure that when I get out of bed in the morning, I'm still energized about what I'm going to do, because we spend so much of our time working. And I think that the day that I stop learning, stop feeling motivated by what I'm doing, that's when I, start craving the next step and the change. So definitely continuing on that path. Obviously, I'm early doors in my current role, so no ambitions to move out of that just yet. And then there's a few sort of more specific technical spaces that I'm quite interested in at the moment. So really interested in doing quite a bit of learning in the digital space at the moment, which I think will be just absolutely critical for leadership, businesses, everything moving forwards. And I will be honest, I really have limited skill set in that arena. So that's my big focus at the moment is upskilling.
Okay, great. And have you had a role in the career so far where you felt your development really accelerated?
I've had a few, and they're probably examples that I've talked to, but I think the category role that I talked about, that definitely was a big unlock in terms of the leadership side of things. I'd say then the moves over to Diageo and then into Mars was more of an unlock on the personal sense in terms of sort of confidence and that side of my development. I think over the years, definitely, I would say, the category roles that I've had have been the ones where I've really been stretched in my thinking, and that's been the more challenging spaces for me.
Yeah.
And then obviously right now, have definitely felt out of my comfort zone over the last sort of 6 to 9 months at times. So that's absolutely pushing my development to the limits at the moment, which is fantastic.
Yeah. That's a good point, actually. I think development comes from being uncomfortable, and it's very easy to not go down that path.
Yeah, 100%. I don't know whether, I'm sure a few people on the call would have seen the AFGC Future Leaders thing recently, and Holly Ransom was talking on there, and she talked about being comfortable being uncomfortable. And absolutely 100%, that is when, and you feel sick in the stomach doing it. I have to say, and I'll share vulnerably with the group, I don't really like public speaking. So things like this for me are yep, I'll do it, and then afterwards, oh, what was I thinking? But that's when you learn. It's when you develop, and you're not comfortable, but just push yourself, and again, I'd say just jump.
How bad can it be? It's going fine, Jen.
That's fine. and so far, what the people on call don't know, obviously, is that there's a third person in the room that had the capacity to derail this completely, but hasn't. So I've got my son Ollie in the corner of the room. So this is working life juggle of 9-year-old son in the corner that's going to an ENT appointment afterwards. So this is.
He's sitting very quietly. We're very impressed.
He's very well behaved.
Great. I talked right at the start about the fact I see a lot of people get to mid-career and they're stuck. And it's typically because they've narrowed their choices too soon, and they kind of become specialists too early almost, and therefore lack the competitiveness to go for more senior roles. What advice would you give those on the call, Jen, about developing the skills and experiences to ensure the career keeps progressing?
I really think for me this is that you've talked about it, the breadth of experiences, and not being closed off and blinkered to opportunities. So I think when you've got a clear path that you're going in, and often people have just set themselves time limits, or by this age I need to be in this role, or this is where I need to get to, and I've had conversations with people over the years where they've career conversations where they've used those words, and you feel like putting your head in your hands, but it doesn't matter. You've got to let that stuff go. So let the sort of rigid plan go. Be flexible, and you need to take the blinkers off and be open, because you never know what opportunity is going to be there on the side that could be a great opportunity to get some cross-functional experience, to meeting different people in a business. Go do the secondment and meet a different group of stakeholders in your business, because it might not be the role for you, and that might not be the function for you, but you don't know where the people in that function will end up down the track. So you're networking, you're learning, you're out your comfort zone, like we said. Don't be blinkered to the opportunities. Is probably the big thing for me.
I agree, and I think we're getting there. But in practical terms, I'm recruiting a national account manager right now for a business who is looking to invest in emerging channels in e-com. And I said, if I was to take 10 conversations I have with people who I think could do this role, 7 out of 10 will say, I'd rather stick in Coles or Woolies, or that's my aspiration. 2 out of 10 might say, I want to broaden probably categories, but logical choice for me. I understand that, which leaves me 1 in 10 who's saying, that sounds great, I'm up for it. And I think that's part of it, is the hierarchical nature of how FMCG still looks at roles and customers. What do you think we've got to do to break this down?
It's really a challenging one, and I've had this a few times over the years. So actually, particularly when I was at Frucor. So for those that don't know, I mean, you've had a few sales directors for Frucor on the call, so probably everybody knows what Frucor is now, but a very impulse-led business. So actually a much bigger part of that business sits in mainstream grocery. And we used to have all sorts of trouble recruiting for those roles, for the NAM roles for petrol and convenience. But you'd say to people that these are the big roles that are in the spotlight in our business. Coles and Woolworths, great, but that's not a big part of the business at the time. This was a while ago, don't know now. But that's not where we're actually doing most of our innovation and learning and growing. It's in these roles over here. And you would really struggle to attract people into them because they're just so, I guess it's so ingrained that in most of the bigger FMCG businesses, you've probably got 80% of your business in those two customers, and therefore that's where the spotlight is.
Yeah.
Which probably starts sort of talking to a little bit of, ego over learning. Do you need to be in the spotlight, or do you need to be in the space where you can actually learn the most?
Yeah.
And I think that, does get in people's way sometimes. The food service role that I took at Mars, I had people say to me, like, you're working, you've led grocery, you've worked on Endeavour Drinks, Woolworths at Diageo, the big chunky customers. What are you doing? You don't go to food service. You're going backwards, Jen. What are you doing? I said, I'm not going backwards. I'm going into a role where I've never worked in that channel. It's an extremely diverse channel, very complicated. It's different from anything I've ever done. It's a different structure of team than I've had before. And it's in a business where I know I'm going to get, the right culture, right opportunities. Yeah. It was the right move. But, could quite easily have had that black and white view of, it's not, a Woolworths role, it's not a Coles role, it's not a director role. And I wouldn't be sitting where I am now had I not done that. And I can also tell you, hand on heart, that in my current role, had I not had that experience in that channel, it's such a huge part of our sales and a hugely important contributor to our business, I wouldn't have understood it properly. And I wouldn't be able to sort of support that team on, the strategy that they're redoing at the moment. So I think we've just got to be a little more open-minded. And again, in terms of how we help people, recognise these opportunities, it's things like this, showcase people's backgrounds and career profiling and talent backgrounds and things like that. We do a bit of that within Mars, where we'll sort of showcase the strange career paths people have had. And I just think we need to do more of it because, we need to open our minds a little in that space.
Yeah, completely. I think that food service is a great space, very complex, as you say. Your move there made perfect sense to me. Because we talk about this, we've used various models throughout the program. McKinsey's T model, we've used the patchwork quilt, the jigsaw, all these different
chessboards.
There's all. But the principle is, nobody's career who sat in this chair as a sales director is the same as the next person who sits in the chair. They're all non-linear, and they've all approached the proactive or reactive decision making with a view as it's another experience. And that creates the base for me to be a more effective leader. And it also, as a recruiter, it makes that individual more competitive because they've actually got more to bring to the role in terms of commercial perspective and experience. So I think it makes perfect sense. In terms of your thinking around the decisions you make on career moves, and you talked a bit about one there, obviously to Mars. Do you kind of apply the same thinking, or how do you kind of weigh up an opportunity?
It's really back to this. I feel like a broken record, but am I going to learn something new? Is this going to add, that whether it's the jigsaw piece, the chess move, the thing in the backpack? Is it going to be something different than what I've done before? If the answer to that is yes, that's kind of a tick. Yeah. Do I feel uncomfortable about doing it? If the answer to that is yes, great tick. Yeah. And I think if that's the criteria for me. New, learning, uncomfortable, you're on the right track.
And what happens, with that kind of thought and process when it goes wrong? Because it does go wrong. And what advice would you give people who have kind of thought they made a great decision, but they're in the role and going, it's not what I expected?
Don't be afraid to change it. Don't be afraid to, say it was the wrong decision and move on to the next thing. Yes, you need to learn and you need to grow and you need to have these opportunities. But if something's not working, I'm a very firm believer that only you can change that. So either change your perspective, give it another try approaching the role differently, Or if you really can't change the perspective and it's really not working for you, chalk it up to experience. Take the positives out of it, because there will be some. You'll have learned what you don't want from the next role, and move on. The one thing I don't have time for is people that sort of sit in situations that they're not comfortable in, they're not happy in, and they don't do anything about it. Act, do something, make a bold choice, and see what happens. But I think I've always been taught, from a young age, make a decision, make it the right one. Now that doesn't mean that you kind of put your head in the sand and that's it, I'm on this path. But take the positives out of it and then make the next decision and keep moving. So I think I also would say don't make that decision too quickly. Because realistically, if you've made a jump into something new and different, you're going to have a period of time where you're uncomfortable and out of your depth. There have been times over the last 6 months where I took on this role. COVID hit, we moved house, I had my son in hospital with an operation, everything all at once. We had some major customer negotiations going on. And there were many times where I thought, oh, this is, what have I done? This is the wrong choice. And you just have to stop and breathe. Stop, breathe, step back, know that it's a moment in time, and that you'll kind of come out the other end, and just remind yourself why you're doing it as well. So I think there's two schools of thoughts there. Make sure that you're not just panicking in the moment. Then if you're really sure it's not that and it wasn't the right call, do something about it.
I think and I agree with you. My advice when I get a call from somebody who's in a bit of a panic, or they've made a bad decision, it's all not what they expected, is actually too often they haven't spoken to the business about it. They've internalized it and they've come to me in a bit of a panic, and it's like, well, talk to your line manager, talk to HR, talk to the business about how you feel, why you feel like that, and actually often it can be fixed, or your direction can change, because if you've made a decision on the business being right for you and the role's wrong, as we said before, then let's change the role or change how you do the role. There's a lot of things you can actually influence, as opposed to just jumping. And if you've done that, you need to go. Then you need to go. But invest some time and really thinking
time.
through.
100% agree with that, Mike.
Another question I've asked everybody is around the interviewing process, and when you're interviewing candidates, Jen, internal or external, what impresses you and what frustrates you?
Probably this would be an example of how you gravitate to people that you find similar, but authenticity is absolutely something in an interview that I really value. I want somebody to be able to tell me things that they've done wrong, tell me what they've learned from that experience. I really, really value people who are very clear on what their development areas are and what they're doing about them. So there's two different things there. You can know what your development areas are, but if you don't have a plan and you're sort of not doing anything about them, then that's not really that helpful. I think the other thing, when you're interviewing, we've talked about this fit of culture in a business, and it's a two-way interview, right? So I think you want people to be interviewing you as well, because it has to be the right fit. So I really like it when people have genuine questions that they ask in an interview. It's a real pet peeve of mine when people ask questions for the sake of it and then clearly aren't listening to the answers. Or it's the bog standard reel off of something about the principles, or if you ask a genuine question, seek to understand what's your business about, because I want to make sure that it's right for me and I'm going to fit there. I really value that in an interview. So that's
great advice. Couldn't say it better myself. Okay. Before we jump into open questions, to finish up as we'll do in every session, what 3 pieces of advice would you give an aspiring sales director?
So I would say be really clear on your ambition and have a development plan that supports that, and be really active on that development plan. So, they're not there to sit in the cupboard and gather dust, really focus on your development. Build a network and build it authentically. Don't build it when you need it. Actually just start making contacts, because, I said I was talking to Mars for 6 years. I wasn't ready to move at those times, but, build that network. I think that's just going to become increasingly important. And when you think about some of the topics we've covered today around people sort of gravitating to people that they know and have connections with, I will reach out to people if I have roles available and I know people in my head that I've already made those connections with. That's the first place I'm going, right? So on that note, I've got a couple of roles at the moment. Can I do a shameless plug? We've got a digital role coming up. Any aspiring digital people out there in the commerce space, feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. So yeah, definitely build your network, and don't have the ego. Take the less traveled path. Make those bold, crazy moves. Trust your gut. But that's the three things I would say. So development properly, network authentically, and take the crazy path and take a risk.
Great. Thanks, Jen. Guys, any questions you want to fire through, use the chat facility. We've got a bunch of here as well, so we'll go through those now in the last 10 minutes or so. How do you achieve work-life balance is one of the questions.
So it's never a balance, it's always a juggle, right? So it's never perfectly sort of, sitting there like this. It is definitely a juggle. But I've learned, a few things over the years in terms of what does and doesn't work. I think one of the most helpful pieces of advice that I was given was you have to recognise that you can't be perfect at everything, and not at all times. So, there will be moments when absolutely, you are close to perfect as a parent, and then there'll be times when you're not, and the same in your work environment. So, for me, recognising that I'm not always going to get it right and not sort of kicking yourself too much for that, just dust yourself off and move on, that's been really sort of enlightening. I think the other thing is making choices. So there are things that are incredibly important to you on both sides of that fence, right? So there will be specific work things that you really want to prioritise because they're important to you. It's these opportunities like today where, I wanted to be here, as much as it was, a daunting experience, you want to do it. You've got to find a way to juggle that. So as I said, I've got Ollie sat in the corner because we also had an appointment that we could not move today. So you make it work. I think it's absolutely critical that you have a support network around you. You can't do it without that. So, I don't have somebody else at home, but I have a group of other mums and family and extended family, and, you've got to ask them for help. So I think that's something I've learned over the years is I'm a bit reluctant to put my hand up and ask with things like that, particularly on the home front. Not anymore. So, you've got to ask for the support, build that network again outside and make the choices. There are certain things with the kids, when it's Mother's Day, that's all, I'm there because nobody else can stand in for that. But there's been many a concert and athletics carnival that I've not quite made it to. So you just got to make the choices and be comfortable with them. I'm getting glared at in the background.
I got that
You've got the death stare.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, mum. I'm hoping COVID is going to turn the dial on that completely, with businesses realising that actually work and life can blend much more effectively than they perhaps perceived before, and performance doesn't change. In fact, it often can increase because you've got more engagement probably, and people who are therefore more committed and able to perform, and blend their work and life together and juggle more effectively.
100%. I know that the support I've got from the leadership team and my boss at Marsville, I know that they support that flex and that juggle, and it's incredibly important. So yes, it will continue to evolve, I think, for everywhere and everyone. Can make it work.
Great. So as someone who hires and recruits, what benefits do you think an individual brings coming from a small business compared to a large business?
Look, there's pros and cons, right? You bring benefits from both sides of this, from the big businesses and the small. But having worked in, as say, Frugal, which I definitely think is bigger than I thought it was at the time, but working in a smaller business, the exposure you have and the accountability that you have is broader, I think. So when you're in a bigger business, you have probably a tighter remit of role, there's more resource around you. You naturally don't pick up the breadth of sort of technical skills that you do in a small business, because you have to roll your sleeves up and get stuck in, because there is nobody else to do that. So I think when I see candidates coming from a smaller business, generally what I see is absolutely that, a real kind of roll your sleeves up attitude, a breadth of experience that generally is greater than some of the bigger businesses. So that's the real pros that I see if you're coming from a small business. And flip side, if you're thinking about going to a small business, you will get breadth of experience that is bigger than you can generally get in a bigger business.
I do find a little bit of reticence in large companies to take people from small companies, but I also find it the other way too. Sometimes small companies can be a little bit unsure about bringing somebody in from a large business for the reason that actually you say, which is there are different experiences. And for me, that's frustrating because I think the large company trained individual can bring so much structure and thinking to a small business, and the small business trained individual can just bring this fluidity and agility of thought and the ability to challenge and go beyond the role, which can really affect a positive change in a large company. So it can frustrate me, but as a recruiter, sometimes that kind of linear thinking as to what the brief is.
Yeah, it comes back to everything we've talked about today, right? You have to keep an open mind, whether you're a candidate looking, a recruiter, a business hiring. You've got to be a bit more open-minded these days. It's not a one-size-fits-all candidate, career path, any of those things. You need the diversity of all those things.
Absolutely. Time for one more question, Jen, before we finish. But in these tougher times, how are you boosting team morale and leading your team?
Yeah, this has actually been a real challenge because I think it's something that when I'm around team, I think it's a strength of mine, and naturally pretty good relationships across the team, and I'm comfortable sort of about talking to everybody. And it's been really challenging because we've actually been working from home since March at Mars, so we've not been together since then. And obviously in the sales team, because I was new into the role, there's a lot of connections that I sort of don't know, or people I haven't met properly. So we've asked a lot of questions of the team. What does engagement look like for you in this space? What do you want? So we've done a variety of things. We've done, teams doing exercise classes online at home together. We've done virtual coffee catch-ups. We've implemented like a town hall where the entire sales function dials in, and we just have a bit of fun. Generally, it's a bit of a, less work, more sort of silly quizzes and things like that, and a little bit of an update. But those are the things. It's just those sort of informal connections, which I do think are harder to have on the Zoom, on the Skype, but making the effort and then reaching out one-on-one. I think you can't underestimate that this situation is different for everybody at the moment. There are people that are loving the working from home and it's giving them a lot of flex. There are people that are hating it. They might be single, living alone, or not single and living and working at home with somebody that's irritating them in the background. But everybody's situations are different. So reaching out and making sure and checking in on people's mental health and well-being has also been an important part of that engagement.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you. Really, really interesting conversation. Loved the chat, Jen, and just going through your journey and another great insight to a pathway that's different again. But the point being, there are many different pathways. The career, in order for your career to keep progressing, seek out those new experiences. Take the bold, the crazy decisions from time to time, and it will pay off. Fantastic. Guys, that's all right. I hope everyone's feeling, again, another step or two better prepared to think about their careers and build their career narratives. Guys, we've got 3 more sales directors to interview between now and Christmas. The next one is in 2 weeks' time, November 19th. We've got Nick Dawes in from, who's reasonably recently into his new role as sales director at Ferrero. So looking forward to hearing from Nick. I will also plug the marketing director Incubator. So we kicked it off last week, which went really well, and we had a few of the sales guys on that. But you're all welcome to join as many as you like. We've got next week. We've got Megan Farquhar, who's the global marketing director of JDE, Jacobs Douwe Egberts. She's based in Amsterdam, so she's dialing in for that, which is really good of her. I think at midnight. So that's the 12th of November. And for those of you perhaps in a career transition phase too, the last plug would be we're running a series of free seminars on preparing yourself for a good career search. So if that's of interest to you, then please reach out and I can send links as well. So thanks again, Jen. That was awesome. Thanks everyone for being on the call today. And guys, have a great Thursday.
Happy Thursday.